Imagine you're in a meeting and your boss says, "Agree with my plan or you'll be out of a job." Or you're watching a political debate and a candidate declares, "Support this policy or our country will face disaster." These scenarios share a common thread: the use of fear and threats to force agreement. This tactic, known as Argumentum ad Baculum, is a powerful yet flawed method of persuasion. Today, we're dissecting this fallacy to help you recognize it, understand its pitfalls, and learn to counter it effectively. Let's dive in. Defining key concepts. Argument. An argument is a set of statements or propositions where some are premises and one is the conclusion. The premises provide support or evidence for the conclusion. Effective arguments rely on logical connections between the premises and the conclusion, making them a cornerstone of rational discourse. Logic is the study of principles of valid reasoning and argumentation. It involves understanding how to construct sound arguments, identify valid inferences, and recognize faulty reasoning. Logic helps us distinguish between arguments that genuinely support their conclusions and those that don't. Fallacy. A fallacy is a flaw in reasoning that weakens an argument. Fallacies can be either formal, related to the structure of the argument, or informal, related to the content or context. Recognizing fallacies is crucial for critical thinking and effective communication, as they often obscure the truth and mislead audiences. Argumentum ad Baculum. Argumentum ad Baculum, also known as the appeal to force or appeal to fear, is an informal fallacy where someone attempts to persuade others by using threats, intimidation, or the fear of adverse consequences rather than logical reasoning. This fallacy undermines rational discourse by shifting the focus from evidence and logic to fear and coercion. What is Argumentum ad Baculum? Historical context. The term Argumentum ad Baculum has roots in classical rhetoric and has been discussed by philosophers for centuries. Aristotle, in his works on rhetoric and logic, highlighted various fallacies and erroneous reasoning methods, including appeals to force. Over time, this fallacy has been analyzed and critiqued by numerous scholars, making it a staple topic in the study of logical fallacies. Examples in everyday life. To better understand this fallacy, let's look at some everyday examples. Workplace scenario. A manager tells an employee, "You need to work overtime this weekend. If you don't, you'll be fired." Instead of explaining why the overtime is necessary or how it benefits the team, the manager resorts to threats. Political discourse. A politician says, "If you don't support this policy, our country will face severe consequences, and you will be responsible for the downfall." The politician uses fear of negative outcomes to garner support, rather than presenting logical arguments for the policy. Parenting. A parent tells their child, "If you don't finish your homework, you won't be allowed to watch TV for a week." While this may seem like a standard disciplinary tactic, it shifts the focus from the importance of doing homework to the fear of punishment. The structure of Argumentum ad Baculum. Basic. Structure. The basic structure of an Argumentum ad Baculum can be summarized as follows. Claim. The statement or proposition being argued. Threat. The implication of harm or adverse consequences if the claim is not accepted. Conclusion. The acceptance of the claim based on the fear of the threat. Logical form. In formal logic, the structure can be represented as premise 1. If P is not accepted, then Q, a negative consequence, will occur. Premise 2. Q is undesirable. Conclusion. Therefore, P should be accepted. For instance, premise 1. If you don't agree to the new policy, P, you will lose your job, Q. Premise 2. Losing your job is undesirable. Conclusion. Therefore, you should agree to the new policy, P. Variations. There are variations of this fallacy that may not always involve direct threats. These can include implicit threats. The threat is implied rather than explicitly stated. For example, "It would be a shame if something happened to your business if you don't support our proposal." Social pressure, using social consequences or ostracism as a form of threat. For instance, "If you don't vote for this candidate, people will think you don't care about our community." Authority figures. Leveraging the power or authority of a figure to induce fear. For example, the CEO expects everyone to follow this plan, or there will be consequences. Why argumentum ad baculum is a fallacy. Lack of logical basis. The primary reason argumentum ad baculum is considered a fallacy is that it lacks a logical basis for the argument. Instead of providing evidence or reasoning to support the claim, the arguer relies on fear and intimidation. This undermines the principles of rational discourse and critical thinking. Emotional manipulation. This fallacy often involves emotional manipulation, as it exploits the fear of adverse consequences to coerce acceptance of a claim. By appealing to emotions rather than reason, it bypasses critical analysis and rational decision-making. Ethical concerns. Using threats or intimidation in arguments raises significant ethical concerns. It can create an environment of fear and oppression, stifling open dialogue and the free exchange of ideas. In many contexts, such tactics can be considered unethical or even abusive. Identifying argumentum. Ad baculum. Key indicators. To identify argumentum ad baculum in arguments, look for the following key indicators. Presence of threats. The argument includes a direct or implied threat of negative consequences if the claim is not accepted. Lack of evidence. The argument lacks substantial evidence or reasoning to support the claim. Emotional appeal. The argument relies heavily on fear or intimidation to persuade the audience. Analyzing arguments. When analyzing arguments for this fallacy, consider the following steps. Evaluate the evidence. Assess whether the argument provides logical evidence or reasoning to support the claim. Identify the threat. Determine if the argument includes threats or intimidation tactics. Assess the emotional impact. Consider whether the argument aims to evoke fear or anxiety rather than rational consideration. Examples in media and politics. Argumentum. Ad baculum is prevalent in media and politics, where fear is often used to influence public opinion. For example, media coverage. Sensationalist headlines and stories that use fear to attract attention and influence perceptions. Political campaigns. Campaign ads that use scare tactics to persuade voters, such as highlighting potential disasters or threats from opponents. Case studies, historical examples. McCarthyism. During the Red Scare in the 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy used fear of communism to justify investigations and accusations, often without substantial evidence. This period saw widespread fear and the use of threats to silence dissent and compel conformity. Nazi Germany. The Nazi regime used argumentum ad baculum extensively, employing fear and intimidation to suppress opposition and control the population. The threat of punishment, imprisonment, or death was used to enforce compliance with Nazi policies. Modern examples. Corporate environments. In some corporate environments, employees may be threatened with demotion or job loss if they do not comply with certain policies or directives. This creates a culture of fear and stifles innovation and open communication. Climate change debates. While the scientific consensus supports the reality of climate change, some arguments use fear-based tactics, such as predicting catastrophic outcomes, to compel immediate action. This can be seen as an appeal to fear rather than a presentation of balanced evidence and solutions. How to respond to argumentum. Ad baculum. Critical thinking skills. To effectively respond to argumentum ad baculum, it's essential to develop strong critical thinking skills. Question the evidence. Ask for logical evidence and reasoning to support the claim. Don't accept arguments based solely on fear or threats. Stay calm. Maintain a calm and rational demeanor. Fear can cloud judgment, so staying composed helps in evaluating the argument more effectively. Seek alternative views. Look for alternative perspectives and counter-arguments. This helps in understanding the issue more comprehensively and identifying any flaws in the argument. Counter-arguments. When faced with an argumentum ad baculum, consider using the following counter-arguments. Highlight the fallacy. Point out that the argument relies on threats rather than evidence. Explain why this undermines the validity of the claim. Demand evidence. Request logical evidence and reasoning to support the claim. Emphasize the importance of rational discourse. Address the fear. Acknowledge the fear or concern being used but separate it from the argument. Discuss the issue rationally without being swayed by the threat. Ethical communication. Promoting ethical communication is crucial in combating fallacies like argumentum, ad baculum. Encourage open dialogue. Foster an environment where open and respectful dialogue is encouraged. This helps in reducing the reliance on fear and intimidation. Promote logical reasoning. Emphasize the importance of logical reasoning and evidence-based arguments in discussions and debates. Educate others. Raise awareness about logical fallacies and the importance of critical thinking. Educating others helps in creating a more informed and rational society. In conclusion, argumentum ad baculum, or the appeal to force, is a logical fallacy that undermines rational discourse by relying on threats and intimidation rather than evidence and reasoning. By understanding its structure, identifying its presence in arguments, and knowing how to respond effectively, we can promote more ethical and logical communication. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more insightful videos. Stay curious, stay critical, and keep thinking logically.